In this episode, we're talking about school trips and residentials, those memorable experiences many of us remember from our own school days. But for our adopted children and those with additional needs, these opportunities can come with unique challenges. We'll explore why these experiences can still be incredibly valuable, what difficulties might arise, and how schools and families can work together to make them safe, inclusive, and positive for every child. So let's dive straight in. A big topic: residential trips, school visits. Big difference between primary and secondary, but biggest question: are they worth it?
It's a great question, Lee. It's a great because we are going to be talking today about some of the challenges. So yeah, let's start with whether they're worth it. What do you think, Jason?
I'd say absolutely yes. There are things we have to overcome, and for some children, it is going to present more challenges. But I think it's important that we try and work around those because it's important that we include those children, all of the children, isn't it? And for our adopted children, they need to be included in all of the activities as much as they can be. But yeah, there's so much to be gained from hands-on experiences. You can't beat seeing and handling artifacts or going to visit a place and seeing it in real life. It's all very well looking at pictures of something or reading a book about it or looking at it on a screen, but going there is a whole different experience. And they're the sort of things I reckon if you think about adults' memories of school, some of those will include times when they went on a residential or a sleepover or a school trip somewhere. They're not going to remember the English lesson they had when they read a certain book, probably, unless something strange happened. But yeah, these things are so valuable, hands-on experiences. And don't forget, a lot of our children might not have had many of these experiences in the families that they perhaps grew up with initially.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think if I reflect on my time as a teacher as well, at those school trips, it was a real opportunity to kind of build your relationships with the children because you weren't asking them to sit still, you weren't asking them
Mm,
to complete the work, you weren't having to let them know when they'd perhaps made an error. It was much more relaxed, and so you could chat with them on the coach,
yeah.
and you could show a different side to yourself, which meant perhaps the children might feel a little bit more connected with you, but also you could see a different side to them as well. Certainly as a maths teacher, I really only ever knew about their maths. And so it was a real opportunity to kind of like bond and get to know them a little bit better. So as well as the hands-on learning, I just thought it was a really nice opportunity to kind of, yeah, perhaps feel more connected as a group.
Yeah, there's all that social development that takes place. You're absolutely right. And yeah, I have to say that the some of the things that I found most interesting about taking children on residentials in primary school was just those relationships and how certain children suddenly shone. And sometimes the children that struggle in the classroom with academic work were suddenly the most capable at problem solving and practical stuff, and suddenly taking charge of a little group and like, what's this? What's going on here? You'd stand there thinking, wow, I can't believe that's the same child who
Mm.
normally has no confidence in certain things or avoids certain work and suddenly is in a different setting and can't and starts taking charge and offering ideas and being very very different, and it shows that different side of them that you might realize that they've got a lot of skill that we've not perhaps seen before. So with a lot of residentials, for example, give opportunities for problem solving tasks, climbing and um, sometimes going on rope swings and all sorts of stuff like that, and building boats and dens and all kinds of things where they're not being asked to sit and write and show, do any formal maths and things, but suddenly they're doing something very different. And sometimes the children that were most confident in the class were completely useless and struggled more actually. And it was quite an interesting flip around, and I found that really, really fascinating. And that knowledge, like you say, Lisa, is then something you realize and you can celebrate and notice, and you can take that with you then back into school because you
Yeah.
can remember that. And when you've got those moments in the classroom, you can say, "I remember, you've got all that skill. Let's try and do something to build on it and make sure we don't forget there's more to you than what we perhaps see in a classroom setting. It's more holistic."
So this is probably going to link into lots of things that we've spoken about before, but why might those residential trips or those school visits be particularly challenging for our adopted children?
I think before we dig into that, it's worth kind of making it clear that we're talking today about a massive variety of things. So,
Mm.
my daughter, when she first started primary school, she would have a little visit to the local church where they would walk down as a class, and it would take an hour, maybe an hour and a half to do the walk, do the visit, and walk back. So that's kind of like your baseline school visit is like where you might start. But certainly, once you're getting towards the end of secondary school, you might be talking about trips abroad. You might be talking about a week in the Alps, or you might be talking about a trip
Mm.
to Venice if they're studying English literature, perhaps. One secondary school I worked in, they had, I think it was a fortnight in Zimbabwe because they'd set up
Amazing.
a kind of collective with some local coffee bean growers. So they went over to meet them, and we ended up importing their coffee in, and they sold it in the local area as a little kind of like social enterprise thing. So we have a massive, from walking to the local church all the way up to flying for a fortnight to Zimbabwe. So it's just, yeah, it's worth acknowledging that before we start thinking about what some of the difficulties might be.
Absolutely, yeah.
And even in a primary school, there's going to be a massive difference between what they do, like you say, that baseline trip to the library or church, and then going all the way to sleepovers, often in year six, but got often before that too. I suppose if the school has a sort of track record of doing lots of this kind of hands-on learning, it's going to be easier for the children to get used to them as they go through the school and perhaps go towards a sleepover. If they don't do very much of it, if there's very little outdoor learning going on or off-site, and suddenly they're being asked to go for a sleepover, it could be a huge challenge. But I mean, our children in particular are going to be thinking, if a lot of them will have attachment issues, won't they? So
Mm.
that's going to be difficult because they're going to be even walking to a church, let's say, or a library might be challenging because it's taken them a while probably to get used to being in the school and feeling safe, being with those adults, having that routine. Suddenly it's going to be different and it's going to be unexpected. We're going to be stepping outside into potentially unknown. So it's going to set off
I think
potentially
that's
lots of
it.
anxieties and things, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of comfort and a lot of safety comes from routine and
Mm,
predictability, and these things are out of the routine, and what's going to happen within them are unpredictable. So they will not be on the school grounds anymore. Perhaps the teacher who's allocated to their little group might not be the teacher that they're familiar with. Quite often, if children are walking somewhere or going on transport, they have to go like be buddied up, like walk in a pair or sit in a pair, and you might have anxiety about who your buddy's
mm,
going to be. And also, when you get there, well, what are the expectations? Because many children, even if
Mm,
they find it difficult, they know what the expectations of the classroom are.
mhm,
mm,
But actually, what are the expectations when I go in this group, into the library, into the church, into Wonderland?
mhm,
What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? Um, yeah, and what do I need to do? So all of that unknown, I think, can really unsettle children. Um, and then I think something that also just popped into my head is often it can be sensory overwhelm
mm,
yeah.
because the children are very excited. So there's often an awful lot of noise. Doesn't matter if you're walking somewhere or whether you're going on a coach, it can be really, really loud. Um, when people bring out the food on the coach, it can really, really smell funny. I know of children who've had real difficulties because they've gone to kind of like a talk, to go and watch someone. I don't want to say
Mm,
lecture because these are children, but you'd have, I don't know, like a guest speaker, like a poet or an author or something. But actually, these things can be held in big rooms that are
mm.
very, very noisy, and it can just be quite overwhelming for the senses.
absolutely. Interesting. I don't think generally we'd in a primary setting you'd don't generally get the food out in the coach and stuff because that'd be a nightmare. Thankfully, we don't have that
Jason,
problem.
did you never sit on the back of the coach and get the food out and sneak it? I
But
mean, I certainly did as a child, and I'm pretty
Ooh.
sure my daughter's doing it now. So,
it's a rite of
when,
passage. It's got to be
yeah,
done.
Well,
whether teachers allow it or not doesn't mean that it doesn't happen.
well, yeah, and you've got to think about those that get travel sick where they sit and all the rest of it.
Gosh,
Yeah,
yes.
there's lots of things to consider.
Mm,
But yeah, you're right, and I have to say this: the advent of seatbelts made a big difference because suddenly children are sitting down. Because
Yeah.
before that, they'd been much more tempted to kneel up, turn around behind them, natter to the people behind them,
yeah.
lean across the aisle to the people, be just get in each other's way, and it would generate noise. But now with the seatbelts, which have been around for years in coaches, they just sit still and generally talk, and it's a lot calmer in my experience than it used to be.
I think also when we think about some of the things that might be challenging is, Jason was talking there about some of the things that we might ask children to do
Mm,
on a day trip or a residential. So again, if we were perhaps going to somewhere like Wonderland or Hatton Park. Other theme parks are available.
Mhm.
Children might actually be very apprehensive about the rides or going down big slides, or they might be worried about what they're going to be asked to do. But we always think it's a great thing to offer children to opportunities to go kayaking or climbing or do the high ropes. But actually, those activities are very scary
Mm.
for some children. When it comes to doing, so I used to run something called Maths at Malvern, and that was all about maths, obviously, good, fun mathematical problems. But many children would be very apprehensive because they just didn't know whether or not they'd be able to do it. So I think
Mm.
our children in particular really struggle with um, that fear of failure and what it says about them and how it impacts their kind of view of themselves.
Yeah.
So we often think it's great to give children these opportunities, but when children are perhaps have that low view of themselves, perhaps struggle with self-esteem, things like this can m- make them
Yeah.
very wary. Yeah.
And some trips, as you say, are designed, if they're kind of outdoor pursuit kind of things, are designed to provide children with an experience of fear, but
Mm.
within a safe environment. So risk taking, and so on. And for many children, that might be new and novel, and having to process. But maybe for our children, fear is something they've been living with and continue to live with all the time. So their adrenaline's already running high. So
Absolutely.
we have to be very mindful of what we're asking them to do. And that's about preparing them for it, isn't it, as much as possible?
And we've not even really mentioned, like coming up to like thinking about residentials, just actually being away from home.
Mm.
Yeah, it's scary.
You
Oh, that's a
know,
huge thing. Oh, yeah.
that's massively scary.
Away from the caregivers they've been bonding
Mm.
with, um, and still may have complex attachments with. So yeah, that can all be quite challenging to say the least. But there are ways we can get still there are ways to overcome those difficulties. So
Mm.
perhaps we'll talk about some of those a bit later.
Yeah.
So, thinking about those challenges that you've talked about, what do you think some of the common emotional or behavioural responses are that schools might notice in our adopted children during those outings? What is it that they could be looking out for, they might see?
Well, I was wondering about when I looked at that. I was thinking, this might be before that. They might get some of those behaviours before they go. If there's
Mm.
a build up towards an
Mm.
event, even if it is like a day trip, there could be anxiety. There might be a bit of a regression. You might see behaviours you've not seen for a long time.
Yeah.
The children have stopped because they're kind of showing their anxiety. So I think it's important to be tuned into that and look out for changes in the child's behaviour in school, um, even though they're in a routine and so on, because they know there's something's coming up, and being able to acknowledge that from saying, I wonder if you're feeling a bit nervous because, helping to articulate those feelings for them. But yeah, and I'd say perhaps the same on the residential itself. It's helpful to speak with the parents, obviously, because the parents will help you to
Mm.
give you a sense of what their behaviours might show. They might do something that, on the face of it, seems different to what is actually going on. So let's say they might get giddy and giggly, which on the surface looks like fun, but it could be a symptom of really high anxiety and worry. It's just that we've got to make sure we don't misinterpret that. So the parents will help us, won't they, with those sort of things?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. And I think that's it. Key is kind of like talking with parents and parents talking with schools, because when we think about the common behaviours, I'm not really sure that there are common behaviours. Some children will kind of retreat into themselves and almost kind of like shut down and withdraw. And so you might see them as being a bit quieter than normal. Jason, you
mm,
said, children might actually look very, very excited
Mm.
and very, very giddy and really kind of like looking forward to it, but it's not giving a true picture of what's going underneath. Other children might have a full blown meltdown about it. We might see regression behaviors. So we might just see a child being a little bit more fidgety, a little bit more, um, yeah, unable to keep still as their anxieties kind of like play out through littler behaviors.
mm.
And
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's really hard to kind of pinpoint, common behaviors. It's just something, it's a change, isn't it? A change in
Yeah.
that child from what you have grown to know as their normal.
I think if you think about a previous podcast, we talked about transitions, didn't we, and how that can affect them. And it's a lot of it will probably be similar because it's a different kind of transition, and albeit a small one for a limited time, but it's going to possibly provoke some stress responses at least.
Mm.
I mean, usually once the events are happening and the trip's happening, the behaviours tend to sort of subside into something much more what you know typical of that child. Because once they can see what's going on, they realise things are, oh, I know what's going on now. I feel like I'm okay. It usually settles down quite a lot. So generally when I've seen responses, they tend to be on the build up or perhaps on the travel down if it's on a coach, um, more than perhaps during the session itself.
So, what steps, Jason? You talked about, noticing
Mm,
responses before, but I think it's important to think about that before. What steps can schools
yeah.
take to help children feel safe, to feel prepared?
Um, well, I think these things are the same whether it's a small trip or a large
Mm.
overnight stay. It's got to be thinking about whether they benefit from being prepared. So helping the children to see in advance what's going to happen. So talk to them in plenty of time, almost like a social story. Maybe use pictures, show them pictures of the place. If it's somewhere local, they can go and you can take them see it. You know, if it's possible, if you've got someone who works with that child, it might be possible, or get the parent might be happy to take them to this place that's around the corner or in the village or the town, whatever. They can go and see the place itself. They're going to see if they need to. But yeah, often photos help. They can see where they're going to walk, what's going to happen. Um, they can sort of predict in advance what's going to happen. And it's important to talk to the parents throughout all of this and explain how you're going to help them to prepare. And so you got that channel of communication, so the parents can then tell you if they've noticed anything that's going on, or if they've got questions that they're asking at home. That then they can say, well, that's fine. We'll
Yeah,
ask
it
them.
can
We'll talk to
reinforce it.
school.
Yeah, and it might also be worth talking about who the key people are that they're going to be around that day.
Yeah,
So, like I say, giving them an element of control and perhaps allowing them to pick their buddy if one is needed. And also kind of really thinking, schools really need to think about who the key member of staff is going to be with
absolutely.
that child,
Yeah.
someone that's familiar to them, that they have a good relationship with, and
Hmm.
also someone who is going to notice any of
Hmm.
the anxieties kind of creeping out, someone who's going to notice and acknowledge it. So, yeah, it's important that they think about staffing.
Yeah. I mean, they'll be doing in-depth risk assessments, but within that, they'll have to consider individual children because there'll be lots of other children with individual needs, children with additional special education needs, disabilities, and so on that we need to consider. But children who are either currently in care or a care experience will often need some additional consideration for those sort of things. Yeah, and absolutely have the right adult with them. It's going to be a massive difference because they can reassure, I'll be with you all the time. We'll be fine. We'll help each other. And if they know that, it's going to take a lot of the anxiety out. And often it'll be the class teacher that has to have them in their group because maybe that's the person they feel most
Yeah.
secure with, or it might be a TA, for example. But yeah, and absolutely have the right children around and who they feel.
Yeah, and something that I have seen a lot of with the families that I work with is, when parents and teachers are talking before these trips, some parents are able to take that time off work and go, and they
Mm.
can be their child's safe person. They can make sure that they can be there and they can notice. And I know it's not possible for all parents, or not all children need that, but schools are certainly open to the idea of parents accompanying on
Oh yeah,
certain trips. I mean, I don't think
lot of
you're gonna
trips
get
needed.
yeah, I don't think you're gonna get a free holiday to Zimbabwe, but it's
No.
you're all right going to the library or somewhere like that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you
no,
won't get parents on residentials really, but you'll get
no.
them because there's all kinds of issues with DVS checks and everything. But they can certainly be they're routinely needed as part of
Yeah.
day trips because primary schools can't do them without the help. Now, interesting enough, with our foster children, I've been asked um, many times to take. In fact, that in our case, the boys wouldn't have been able to cope if I hadn't gone
Mm,
with them, not together because of different year groups, but I had to go with one of them, be with him all the time because he would not have been able to manage the day at
mm,
all. Much as he would enjoy it,
Mm.
the members of staff just didn't knew that they would probably be a bit risky for them to be left alone with him. So I had to take time to do that to make sure that he could enjoy it, and as a result, he could. But it is a bit of a mixed bag, though, we'll say, because for some children, for many, that is the parent. If the parent can go, that is the right answer. But now and again, you might find the parent is not the right person because
mm,
the behaviours can escalate with the
Mm.
parent there.
Mhm.
It can actually trigger different behaviours and more extreme because their friends are there. The child's going to feel a bit odd because suddenly they're in front of their friends and their parent,
Mhm.
um, and it's going to feel odd. And I've seen it become very tricky too. So it's actually got to be carefully considered whether that is going to be the right answer.
It's interesting you say that actually, because I was thinking very much from a professional perspective here and thinking about the families that I work with and my experience in schools, and I'd actually temporarily forgotten my daughter, and and I have learnt that I am not the right person to be involved with school things because um, her behaviour becomes more challenging
Yeah.
when I'm there in that setting than when I'm not. She's much much better with the staff in
Yeah.
the school, and yeah, and it I don't want to say it surprised me. I can understand it, but yeah, I'd forgotten. So yeah, parents
Mm.
aren't always the right ones.
And yeah, sometimes that clear separation between school and home has to be kept, and that
Mm,
blurring can be really difficult sometimes.
yeah.
So it just again, it's case by case basis, isn't it? Just the individual child and knowing them and what's going to be appropriate for them.
Something I will just mention here because it still falls under steps that schools can take before.
Mhm.
Um, some children, and you mentioned the children that you're caring for at the moment, Jason, and some children really cannot cope at all with it,
Yeah.
even with all the steps in place. And that is okay. We obviously don't want to force them into a situation. So I'm thinking of a family that I have worked with in the past, and they, for a number of years, did their own mini school trips. So
Mm.
the school would let them know where they were going and their child wouldn't attend with the school, but actually the weekend before or the weekend afterwards, they would take their child to the same place or a similar place to
Yeah.
kind of look at the same or similar things, just in a much more controlled way. And
Mm.
obviously, it took a lot of organisation, but it was the right thing for that child because they were
Yeah.
not going to cope with a
Mm.
trip off-site. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And that again brings us to that sort of topic of how you make adaptations. And yeah, for some children, it might not be the right thing, and it's not being exclusionary or lacking inclusion. It might be much more damaging to take to try and drag them to somewhere that's not right for
Mhm.
them. Um, and so it may not be the time yet because maybe in the future they could. So you think about alternatives. So yeah, that's happened before with one of our foster children we've had who we knew just couldn't cope, and we explored it with the school. They'd explored it with him, but it became clear that it would not be possible. He just would probably have run away, and it would become quite dangerous. Would have been quite scared. So it was best that he stayed in school with his key adult and had a lovely day because they'd planned some special things to do that day, which in parallel to the children doing something else. So it kind of made it worth it. It still ended up being a lovely time, and they were able to share with each other things that they'd done. So it felt like he still had a lovely time, got loads of attention, did some really lovely activities that perhaps wouldn't normally do. So in the end, it was much more beneficial for everybody. So yeah, just being a bit more creative is absolutely essential. Um, and so it might be that some children cope with a limited version of the trip. So sometimes I say it again is if parents can manage this, they can sometimes drive their child rather than a coach. If the coach journey is a bit tricky, they can drive their child to the event place, let the staff take over. Parents go into a cafe elsewhere, keep out of the way. Child does some activities for a sort of agreed period of time. Then maybe at sort of lunchtime, the parents pick them up and off they go because that might be enough. Because we all know that's probably as much as they can manage. So they've taken part in some of the day, perhaps not coping with all of it. So again, it's all by arrangement, all by agreement, and by whatever is going to be the best thing for the child. Clearly, if we don't know, parents aren't always going to be able to just take time off. It's not like that, is it? We know, but if these things are possible, they need to be considered.
Yeah, that reminds me of a family, and their son was going to do their first residential. He was so excited about it. He really, really wanted to go, but parents were very worried about how he was going to cope at night. They thought he'd be fine during the day,
Mm,
but were worried about how he was going to cope at night. And so they just had a backup plan that they were going to be able to pick him up before the night, bring him home to do the sleep at home, and then take him back the
yeah.
next day. Thankfully, it wasn't too far a drive. It was only about 45 minutes. And in the end, it wasn't needed. He coped fine, but
Oh,
everyone felt much, much happier having plan B
yeah.
in
So
place.
you weren't suddenly stuck
Yeah,
thinking, "Oh my God, what can I do?"
yeah.
Yeah, and that reminds me of that we've done similar things again in my experience of particularly in residential visits, which can be sort of 3 or 4 night stays, longer even, um, where we've had a couple of children not necessarily children who were adopted, but certain children with additional needs, but again, was with some attachment difficulties, let's say, in
Mhm.
this particular case, and we knew it wasn't actually um, the child wasn't gonna be able to cope with the sleepover part of it. It would have been just too distressing, um, despite all the conversations we'd had. So the main thing actually was the activities. So the parent was able, because it wasn't too far away, and the parent took them, dropped them off in the morning, and they just did the full range of activities with their friends. Then went home at dinner time, or they could sometimes stop for dinner if they felt capable. Again, that was an option. We get a bit of flexibility. Said if they felt like they wanted to stay for the dinner with their friends and have that, that's great. They could. If they felt like they need to go home, they could do that. So um, that worked really well because then the child had a lovely time, took part in all the activities, and didn't wasn't subject to undue stress. The parents were happy that that they could take part. So it's again, what you just have to be prepared to be flexible about what can work for them.
Mm.
And I think that's it. To summarize all of our lovely kind of like examples and anecdotes, what can a school do? They can communicate with parents,
Yeah,
prepare, and try to be flexible, because we've given lots of different ways that it could work or adjustments that could be made. But really, in reality, the times where I've seen it not work is when schools haven't prepared for it.
Mhm.
They've,
mm,
whether it was conscious or subconsciously burying their head in the sand and just, oh, we've got a trip and that's when actually children have really struggled that I've kind of I've worked alongside. So yeah, there's no one right way to make them work. It's just talking to
yeah.
parents, being flexible, and doing what we need to do to prepare.
So again, I suppose for parents out there thinking about if they did need to make sort of bespoke arrangements for their child, that it's absolutely reasonable to do that and ask for them. Reasonable adjustments comes under that reasonable adjustments idea, doesn't it? That all schools have to be able to do. So yes, by all means, ask if that's appropriate. For your child's needs. If it means that they access what they need to, if they get the most opportunity to access and engage in the activities that are on offer, then let's do it.
We've talked a lot about how important communication is between school
Mm,
and home for trips and for residentials. And Jason, you just started to talk about ask when there's reasonable adjustments that could be made. Say it, ask it. Is there
mm.
anything else that either of you can think of where school and home should be having a conversation to make sure their child's needs are met? Whether it be home sharing, this is what we do when they're feeling a bit wobbly, or this is
Yeah,
what we
absolutely.
say. What are your tips?
Yeah, that would agree completely. Find out what forms of words that they use to help their child um, to deal with some of the emotions that they go through. So, because you won't necessarily have seen them, this might be the first time the teachers and the support staff
Mm.
actually see these children displaying those behaviours because it's going to be outside the norms. And if it's in a place where they're having to sleep over, it's what the things do they help them to sleep? What are the routines that they need? What that
I'm, I'm,
don't
I'm
replicate
thinking.
what they do.
I'm thinking of a mum, and if she's listening to this, she will know who she is. I think she wrote a
Mm.
20 bullet point list things of like the bedtime routine, because actually, her daughter did take a while to settle at night. And so
Mm.
there were 20 things that she wrote down on this list of things to try for the teachers if it was rocky. And I think things like that to share are absolutely fine,
Yeah,
because, the parents, the experts on their children, and they might know what's going to help them if things do get a little bit
yeah.
rocky.
Do you know sometimes just knowledge of if you just again, I was thinking about children in year 5 and 6, particularly when on these residentials, when parents have given us additional information about things that we need to think about and try, and things that might cause the child to feel a bit worried or distressed at certain things at certain times. Um, by actually being able to say to the child, "Oh, I've got this lovely information that your mum or dad or your family have given us, and I know that you like this, and this will help you." Just the fact that you're telling them that made them feel much calmer. I thought, "Oh, they get me. All right, I think it's going to be all right now." So just that sometimes that knowledge in itself, the fact you've had that conversation, you might not actually have to do many of those strategies, but because the child then realizes, oh, okay, they know this now. They know I need this thing. They know I need speaking to in this particular way, or giving additional time to get myself ready, or whatever. Or it's okay to have an extra fluffy teddy that maybe no one else has got because that's fine, and we're not going to make fun of it. We're not. No one else is going to be allowed to make comments about that. For example, whatever it is that they're worried about.
I also think it's a good idea to perhaps try and meet this head on in September, because not all trips, but a lot of trips are kind of staples in the diary. So year one does this trip, and year two does this trip, and year three does this trip. Or I've certainly noticed that in my daughter's school. And yeah, there are odd ones that are thrown in that are kind of like unorganized and a bit more last minute. But actually, it might just be worth having a conversation quite early on in the school year to work out if there is
Yeah.
a specific trip. Not because you need to think about it in September, but just so you don't get to the week before and all of a sudden go, "Oh gosh, there's
Hmm.
there's this thing," you know. So, yeah, being a little bit ahead of it, if possible, is
Yeah.
also useful.
So something that occurred to me as well as we were talking was about it's probably a small thing, but it's probably worth considering is this idea of phone calls home on a residential. Um, in my experience, it's best to avoid them if at all possible,
That popped into
because
my
even though
head
it
as
sounds
well.
like a nice idea, but for all the best will in the world, it can often be ruinous because even though the child might have additional needs and might really benefit, you might think they might benefit. In my experiences, it often triggers a whole heap of emotions, and they just become really upset and desperate to go back home, and they just, you know, they were having a lovely time until then, so let's not open that floodgate. Let's just leave that one. What often we found better is to just send reassuring messages to the family to say, look, oh, he's had a lovely dinner. He's eaten his dinner. Brilliant. Because they might worry about may not eat everything. Just had bedtime, doing activities. He's having a great time. If it's a school phone, which often schools will have, they can send text messages then directly to the parents rather than using the private ones, because clearly that's not, for safeguard reasons, that's not appropriate. Um, so there are lots of things that schools can do like that to keep updating, and then you can just give those messages to the parents. He's just gone to sleep. He's all right. He'll be fine. Whatever. Um, so that they just feel like, okay, phew, because they will be feeling worried because it might be the first time they've let their child go out off site for a sleep overnight. So it is for most parents. It's going to feel quite an anxious time. Um, Potentially for adoptive parents, even more so, or parents of children with additional needs.
Do you think there's any specific kind of training or awareness, although you have both started to talk about this, that staff
Mm.
need before doing this?
Yeah, you have to have first aid trained staff. I mean, that's a legal requirement anyway. So you
Unnecessary.
can't, yeah, you can't not have that. So there's no way that a trip will take place without those staff being present, and they'll
Mhm.
have first aid kits with them. Um, they'll have to have had medical training if necessary for those children that might have EpiPens or whatever. There's all kinds of other things that you have to consider. The number of, I just remember laughing when I think about the last residential with the coach arriving. There was huge boxes of medication and labels and information that these parents had to sign all these forms because so many children were on various kinds of medication and things. It's like, wow, that needed, had to be very careful about the procedures for that. Again, make sure the school's got clear policies and so on. But otherwise, risk assessment training is something that the leaders of the group will need to have done. Not necessarily every member of the staff that's taking part, but they'll have all had a briefing about what to expect, what's going to happen. But yeah, so the training will be there. It has to take place because ultimately, people that if anything, the staff are going to be highly anxious about getting everything right. They understand all too well the level of responsibility they've got. When you've got 30 odd children, even with six adults, you are paranoid about head counting and everyone's standing still and making sure they've not forgotten anything. You don't rest until they've all been handed back to the parents. Believe me.
Yeah, and I just think, it's not necessarily a certain specific training to manage additional needs, or in this case, like adoption related needs.
Mm,
It's, I'm working on the assumption that if a staff member is taking them out for the day or taking them away for a residential stay, that they're going to know this child and be open to hearing what they need to hear from parents. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was specific training. It's
Mm.
no.
it's just having that willingness to really learn as much as they can about what that child may struggle with, how it might present, and what they can do to offer comfort.
What messages would you give to any adoptive parent that's anxious about sending their child off on a residential?
The first one I'd give is that although it might be scary, it might be making you feel anxious,
Mhm.
please try to be open to finding ways to make it work if at all possible. I know it's not right for every child, and I would never advocate for putting a child in a situation that's going to be absolutely intolerable for them. But hopefully, in our examples today, we've given some ideas of how we can approach this flexibly and find a way for children to get some of the benefits of school trips and residentials, even if they can't do it as planned. So that's the first thing is I think as adults to try not to let or as parents try not to let our anxieties stop what
Mm.
could be a nice little experience.
I agree because if the child's not sure, then they'll look to us and read from us, and if we're given the cues, this is something to be scared about. Oh my goodness! Then they're going to think, oh my god, this is bad. I
Mm.
can't. So we've got to try and be careful about that, haven't we? Like we do in many situations, really is. Um, and again, with that communication with the school, you hopefully have a common sort of approach that you're trying to say about the benefits of this trip and what they're going to get out of it, so that school and home are saying similar things, but at the same time making sure we're listening. We're not dismissing anything that the children are saying as, oh, don't be silly, because it might not be. It might be something quite important.
I think
So
that's it. Pace is always relevant, and this is an ideal opportunity to be pacey because it's okay for them to be apprehensive, and it's okay for them to have all of the feelings. A little bit of excitement and a little bit of fear and a little bit of apprehension. It's all going to be mixed up in there. So just really a kind of accepting, acknowledging, and naming that with tons and tons of empathy, but whilst also trying to convey that this isn't a scary thing. It's okay for them to feel that way, but we're not holding tons of anxiety about it.
absolutely.
Any other tips about how we can make school trips a source of joy or confidence or empowerment for children?
I think we're just about said. I think it's about being communication and being flexible. Probably the most important things, so that it works for them, because it's got to work for that child, hasn't it? I mean, it's very hard for schools to accommodate everyone's individual needs, but there are things that can be done that make it work. Let's face it, if the child's struggling, this is going to be difficult for the staff too.
Yeah,
This is not going to be. This is in everyone's benefit. Let's say. So yeah, I think we've got to make sure we go for it and remember what the benefits are. If the benefits are outweighing the disadvantages, then it's still worth it, isn't it?
absolutely. Residential trips and school visits can feel daunting, but with good communication, preparation, and flexibility, they can also become powerful opportunities for growth, confidence, and connection. If schools and families work together and keep the individual child at the centre of the planning, these experiences can create lasting memories for all the right reasons. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.